Hi everyone, I'm so thrilled you're joining me for this explainer. I want to kick things off by having you ask yourself a seemingly simple question. Who actually invented writing? Like, really think about it for a second. Translating these abstract, messy thoughts in our heads into physical symbols that can be perfectly understood by someone else across the globe, or even thousands of years in the future, that is a staggering human achievement. So today, we're going to trace the incredible journey of the written word. We'll explore how humanity went from believing writing was quite literally a gift for ancient gods, all the way to the modern keyboards that have basically turned all of us into active authors. To really wrap our heads around how ancient people viewed the written word, just listen to this quote from the Chinese scholar Liu Shi. He wrote this around 1500 years ago. Get this. Both the first sage Fuzi, who invented writing, drew their literary embellishment from the mind of the Tao. You see, ancient societies didn't have a record of the slow, messy, trial-and-error development of early writing systems. Because of that historical blind spot, they just assumed something so magical, a medium that literally hacked the limits of human speech across space and time, had to be a divine gift. To them, there was just no way it was a mere human invention. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to break this massive historical shift down into 5 quick steps. The divine gift, the elite scribe monopoly, the Gutenberg Revolution, breaking the monopoly, and finally, the active public. Let's dive in.
Starting with part 1, the divine gift and the mythology of the written word, because it actually wasn't just ancient China pointing to the heavens to explain where text came from.
Cultures all across the globe independently developed strikingly similar myths. The Egyptians gave the credit to Thoth, their god of wisdom. The Greeks pointed to Hermes as the creator of their alphabet, or sometimes the mythical king Cadmus. Over in Mesoamerica, the Maya believed Itzmena, the ruler of heaven, literally handed them writing. The Norse, they attributed their runes to Odin. And of course, the Chinese pointed to the first sage Fuxi. Attributing writing to these mythological giants was basically a universal human coping mechanism to explain a technology that felt completely transcendent. Without the gods, ancient people just couldn't fathom how imperfect mortals could invent a tool that practically gave us infinite memory.
Which brings us right to part 2, the elite scribe monopoly, or, the historical reality.
Because while the myths insisted writing belonged to the gods, the reality on the ground was that writing was aggressively controlled by a very small, very elite group of humans. If you look at the literary history of ancient Mesopotamia, a pretty clear pattern jumps out. As large territorial states started forming, cuneiform literature didn't suddenly democratize. Actually, scratch that. It did the exact opposite. It became highly standardized and centralized. Knowledge was fiercely guarded in places like the Royal Library of Nineveh. Reading and writing were absolutely not for the masses. The imperial court intentionally bottlenecked literature and scholarship just to consolidate their own power.
And that created a highly specific professional class known as the Tupsharu. These guys were elite Akkadian-speaking scribes who were rigorously trained in the massive complexities of the cuneiform system. Their education had nothing to do with public enlightenment. Instead, it gave them this exclusive cultural capital that was completely inaccessible to the average person. By keeping ancient dead languages alive in their schools, these scribes made sure they were strictly indispensable. Early literacy wasn't a tool for the people, it was a highly specialized profession designed to protect authority.
During this era, even our entire concept of authorship was completely alien. Ancient Mesopotamian scholars, like the medical writer Esagil-Kanopli or the poet Enheduanna, actually used the metaphor of weaving to describe what they did. They viewed early authorship as taking old, tangled textual threads and carefully weaving them into new, authoritative, standardized forms. It was the ultimate closed loop. Scribes curating the past for other scribes, constantly surveilling access to literature just to guarantee their own elite status at the top of the food chain. But then, everything flips. Part 3, the Gutenberg Revolution. This is the mechanical pivot that shattered the ancient scribe monopoly once and for all. The path to breaking this monopoly was paved by some absolute historical giants of engineering. Now, the oldest surviving book printed with metal movable type is actually the Jikji, which was produced in Korea in 1377. Because logographic writing systems have thousands of characters, movable type was a bit tough to scale there, but the sheer ingenuity was undeniable. Then, fast forward to 1440, Johannes Gutenberg takes the screw press, combines it with his own movable type system tailored for the much smaller Latin alphabet, and boom, the result is completely explosive. Within just a few decades, by the year 1500, presses in Western Europe alone had pumped out more than 20 million copies of books. Let's really put that into perspective. Just look at this number, 3,600. Modeled on heavy-duty screw presses used in agriculture, a single printing press in Gutenberg's era could crank out up to 3,600 pages in a single day. Contrast that with the 40 or so pages you'd get from hand-rubbed printing, where the literal handful of pages a monk could copy by hand. We're not talking about a modest step forward here. This was an entirely new paradigm of human production.
But here is a surprising little fact. The press alone actually wasn't enough to make this work. Gutenberg's real secret weapon was his ink. Traditional water-based inks, the kind used for woodblock printing, would just soak the paper and run everywhere when you try to use them with metal type. So after a ton of trial and error, Gutenberg managed to formulate this specialized oil-based ink that stuck perfectly to the metal and transferred super cleanly to the paper. It was this one chemical breakthrough that literally made the whole modern printing revolution possible.
Moving right along to part 4, breaking the monopoly, and how this completely rewired society from the ground up. So what exactly happens when you take a world starved for information and suddenly flood it with millions of high-quality, cheap pages? You get a massive domino effect. Step 1. The mass production of books makes them vastly more affordable. Step 2. Because books are finally accessible, adult literacy absolutely skyrockets over the next few centuries. And step 3. As everyday folks start reading, printers start publishing in local, everyday languages, vernaculars, instead of elite Latin, which naturally ends up standardizing the spelling and syntax of national languages all over Europe. The crucial takeaway here is that the flow of information was finally unbottlenecked. Latin quickly declined as the ultimate scholarly gatekeeper. Because anyone could quickly print a pamphlet, movements like the Protestant Reformation spread like wildfire across borders. It paved a way for the freer, faster exchange of scientific data, practically jump-starting the scientific revolution. And fundamentally, it gave the growing urban middle class unprecedented access to learning. The elite scribes? Yeah, their ancient monopoly was broken for good. Which leads us to our final section, part 5, the active public. How we went from being mere consumers of text to actual creators. You see, before the printing press, society functioned primarily as a hearing public. Information was a communal event. You'd gather in a town square or a church and just passively listen to whoever was speaking. But cheap books? They created a reading public. Reading is a silent, completely private act. It began rewiring society to be more dispersed, atomistic, and highly individualistic. For the first time, complex ideas could circulate directly to you, without needing a priest or a town crier to interpret them for you. But, and this is a really important but, while prints definitely turned the masses into readers, it also turned the written word into a commodity. The harsh economics of the book trade eventually institutionalized the author with a capital A as a distinct, specialized profession. Concepts like intellectual property and copyright were born. So for roughly 400 years, the whole print paradigm locked us into a fairly rigid one-way street. Textual production was strictly for the professionals, while textual consumption was left to the vast anonymous reading public. And that was basically the deal, right up until the digital age. The arrival of networked computers, and specifically the participatory nature of Web 2.0, completely blew up that 400-year-old one-way street. Today, the sharp dividing line between an elite producing class and a passive consuming class is practically gone. For the very first time in human history, we are witnessing unprecedented, absolute mass participation in public textual production. We've officially evolved from a quiet audience of silent readers into a massively active public of daily writers. Which leaves me with a pretty amazing question to leave you with today. Think about this journey. We started with ancient gods supposedly gifting us the magic of the word. Then the elite scribes hoarded it. Then Gutenberg's press broke the dam and made us all readers. So now that the printing press made us all readers, how is the digital age making us all authors? What does it actually mean when the unimaginable power, once reserved for gods like Thoth and Hermes, is quite literally sitting right there at your fingertips? I really hope this explainer gave you a cool new perspective on the text you consume and create every single day. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this one, and I'll catch you next time.